Bolivia is at the heart of South America. Its people are a mix of Quechua, Aymara, and Guarani. Its colonial past, Catholic Spanish. It extends from the high Andes to tropical jungle. It's culturally, ethnically, and geographically very diverse and potentially wealthy. But it's one of the poorest countries on earth. In 1985, after decades of dictatorship, democracy was restored. There followed a period of stringent economic reforms. But despite all these changes, Bolivia is still poor. 2/3 of Bolivians live on under $1 a day. 1 in 5 children is malnourished, and the infant mortality rate is one of the highest in Latin America. Bolivians suffer from ill health, have short life expectancy, and in recent years inequality has grown. In 1997, the current government, led by President Banzer, decided to start a national dialogue with the people to set out its priorities for integrated development.
Bolivia convened all of civil society, workers, business people, media, military, judicial, political parties, and we looked at 4 areas of Bolivia: social development, economic development, institutional development, and the fight against drugs, to find some basic consensus on what directions we should be heading in those areas.
At the same time, the World Bank was reviewing the effectiveness of international aid policies.
The whole international community in the last decade transferred 10% of GDP to Bolivia in aid. And yet, poverty has hardly changed. And so here we had a huge challenge. And in the first consultative group meeting, we all agreed that this was a shared responsibility. This is not Bolivia, it's not having any poverty alleviation. This is also us, the donor community, is not having any poverty alleviation impact in Bolivia. That's when we realized we have to look at the way we're doing things. And we realized, of course, the best way is to go to our clients and say, okay, if you had a blank slate, how would you reinvent the World Bank in order to help you to reach your goals?
The Bolivian government and the World Bank have met regularly, putting together a strategy which they hope will increase economic growth and improve the lot of the Bolivian poor. A new experimental plan's been in place for a year. It's called the Comprehensive Development Framework, or CDF. The World Bank's representative in Bolivia explains.
The Comprehensive Development Framework started, I think, because of a dissatisfaction with the pace of poverty reduction, given all of the efforts that had been made in development assistance in the past decades. And it grew out of a recognition that in addition to creating the conditions for economic growth, there also needed to be an attention paid to the institutions so that the government program could be more effective and so development assistance could be more effective.
For a second time since it was elected, the Bolivian government has held a process of consultation with the people. The government and the World Bank are keen to emphasize the democratic nature of their consultative program.
What we've never had is poverty alleviation plans and programs that are not designed based on the whims or ideas of 3 people and the city government, but rather by convening everybody from each municipality, from each one of the regions, and having them have a say on how do we go about in the fight against poverty.
To encourage people to take part, the government put out an advert.
Diálogo es
believing that we can change.
That just having good intentions isn't enough. Let's get together and make better decisions.
To participate is to make decisions.
Don't let others decide your future.
Dialogue is fighting against poverty.
Sí se puede. Bolivia tiene la palabra. Diálogo 2000.
Education is one of the cornerstones of the new approach by the government and the World Bank. Under the Comprehensive Development Framework, or CDF, all projects will be coordinated so that the ambitious reforms embarked on by the government can come to fruition. The Deputy Minister for Education explains.
sistema educativo en Bolivia está en crisis desde hace muchos años.
Bolivia's education system has been in a state of crisis for many years. Bolivia has the worst indicators in this part of South America when it comes to illiteracy, truancy, and repeating school years. The low standard of education made us launch a program to reform education, to improve the overall standard of education, and in particular expand public education.
Pero además aumentara la cobertura del servicio de educación pública.
Acara ini disponsori oleh
Kalau nanti masyarakat tidak peduli lagi dengan hutan, siapa lagi yang akan memberikan suatu dorongan kepada masyarakat untuk menyayangi dan mencintai alam yang kita cintai ini.
Pada prinsipnya, potensi alam ini harus kita kelola, akan tetapi harus kita rawat. Bagaimana lingkungan hidup ini agar tetap terjaga.
Saat ini kita memulai sebuah program besar, yaitu program lanskap berkelanjutan, di mana bertujuan untuk memang bagaimana kita memfasilitasi sebuah proses membangun keberlanjutan ekonomi, green economy, dalam konteks lanskap yang besar.
Hutan atau lingkungan hidup itu bukan warisan dari nenek moyang kita, tapi sesungguhnya pinjaman dari anak cucu kita. Konsekuensinya tentu kalau dia bersifat pinjaman harus kita jaga, kelestarian lebih baik lagi untuk hari-hari mendatang.
On the Altiplano at over 4,000 meters high, between Lake Titicaca and the capital La Paz, lies the department of Cucarani. Under the new CEF strategy, a school in Cucuta has been the focus of government reforms. The people here are Aymaran, and in the past many children found primary education hard because all classes were in Spanish. They were made to feel their language and culture was second class. Many children played truant, and their parents, who could often do with an extra pair of hands at home, did little to encourage them to attend. All that's now changed. When these children start school, classes are in both their native Aymara and Spanish. For their teacher, Daniel Mendoza, a qualified psychologist, reforms have been welcome. But when asked what he wants from the government, it's clear he thinks social inequality goes deep.
I'd ask the government to eliminate poverty, especially where there's inequality, because now, where people have more money, they can get a better education.
The reforms have included the involvement of local community leaders in the school, who encourage more pupils to attend. Here, the local mayoress lends her support and that of the civic community.
We support all the work here, and we also keep an eye on the money and how it is being shared out from the public purse.
At the moment, most teachers only work part-time, about 3 hours a day, because they're paid so poorly. The government wants to change this by, it hopes, incorporating international funding into their budgets.
Teachers are earning little and working little. What we are trying to do with the reform is bit by bit to get teachers working full-time so that they earn more. As a country, we need to make a bigger effort to improve the quality of the teachers and pay them more too.
So how does the CDF help the poor? This is El Alto, a town built on the plain above the capital, La Paz, more than 4,000 meters above sea level, and the fastest growing city in Latin America. The population, at about 750,000, is mainly indigenous Aymarans, who've moved from the countryside to El Alto in search of work. Basic facilities such as water, electricity and sanitation are expensive and only reach a small section of the town. Segundo Lima and his wife Maria Baptista have done well. They run a workshop that makes leather goods and woven purses for the tourist market in La Paz. Segundo employs people on a casual basis, depending on how well his goods sell. His workers have no guaranteed or fixed hours and earn less than the official minimum wage. They have no access to health care or social security. Cruz, who's finished secondary school, can't afford to go to university. He's just started working here. His salary is sporadic and well under $1 a day.
It depends on how much it's all. It's not a lot.
Is it enough to live on?
No, it's not. With what's happening, it is not enough to live on.
The casual way that Segundo employs his workers is typical of El Alto, where there's mass unemployment.
I live in a poor area. There are a lot of poor people here because there aren't many jobs, nor much medical attention, as there's no government support. Everybody here lives totally independent from the state support.
At the moment, Segundo's business is doing relatively well, but neither he nor his family have health insurance nor social security. It's a precarious prosperity with no safety net. For many of the NGOs who work in El Alto, the whole concept of the Comprehensive Development Framework is wrong. Javier Gomez is one of the skeptics.
We cannot discuss Bolivia after 15 years of structural adjustment without talking about the economic model that has failed to solve the serious problems that we face, like inequality and poverty. Bolivia is poor. It's not just a fraction of the people who are poor. When thinking about Bolivia, one has to think along those lines. We don't need to make politics to reduce poverty. We need a development model to eliminate inequality and poverty, and the CDF does not come up with that.
This farm is on the outskirts of the village of Aranjuez, close to the provincial capital of Cochabamba. It belongs to Catalina Hinojosa and her husband Cornelio Perofino. Although the soil here is fertile, they have a constant battle to try to get enough water to grow their crops. There's no irrigation or running water there, and no government, World Bank, NGO or private financing for any integrated irrigation system for the village. Where they have managed to get water into the soil, it is fertile and produces speedy results. Here they've grown alfalfa to feed their animals, and later in September they'll plant maize for a Christmas harvest. To get at the life-giving water, they've dug a well 32 meters deep by hand and bought a small pump to bring water to the surface. There was no credit available for them to pay for the pump. The only reason Cornelio and Catalina could afford to buy one is that they both do other jobs. He teaches and she works in a library. For them, life is hard. Once the well runs dry, they may have to leave the village like many before them.
La mayoría, especialmente los jóvenes,
The majority, especially the young, have emigrated to other countries, especially Argentina. Perhaps about 60-65%, and about 30% go to the US. They are looking for new working opportunities, because here there aren't enough jobs. They have gone looking for new horizons.
Recently, the government tried to impose a new law. It proposed putting a tax on the water from their well. In Cornelia's view, none of the revenues raised would be used for any local improvements.
I believe they want to enrich themselves. Each government, in turn, have always thought of their personal sectarian interests, and they have thought or cared little for Bolivia. That is why we're in the situation we're in.
His skepticism is shared by his neighbor, Dr. Franklin Arnez. Dr. Arnez was born and bred in Aranjuez. During the week, he works in Cochabamba. But at the weekend, he comes home and gives free medical advice to his fellow villagers.
Here in Aranjuez, there is no public health center for people to attend. If they need help, they have to go privately and pay for a doctor or hospital. It is a fraud. Lately, there is a subsidy for poor people who have to go to hospital, but you don't get to see it. Poor people who have to go into hospital don't get treated unless they've got money.
As for government consulting the people, Dr. Arnez is adamant.
Absolutely nobody, at least from what I know, and I am here every weekend. Nobody came here to talk to or listen to anybody.
In Bolivia's third biggest city, Cochabamba, this is how half the population receives its water.
Pesan ini disampaikan oleh
kita hidup di dalam bumi yang hijau dan hutan kita adalah paru-parunya. Aku tahu semua ini dari acara TV Bumi Hijau.
Jangan beli satwa liar.
Acara ini disponsori oleh
It's expensive. They pay 7 times the normal rate. It's stored in unhygienic metal containers. Where there's no access to running water, the infant mortality rate triples. The government was looking for a solution that didn't involve public investment. They turned to a consortium led by International Water Limited. It won a 40-year concession to provide water to Cochabamba's 600,000 population. To achieve this, a large tunnel is being bored through the mountains, giving access to a new reservoir. To cover the cost of the project, water tariffs had to be massively increased. The government ignored the warnings from the World Bank and went ahead with the plan. Once the people of Cochabamba heard that water prices would rise, resentment, fear and distrust of the government and foreign corporations exploded onto the streets. The government declared a state of siege. The army was called in. Repression followed. One demonstrator was killed and over 100 injured. The head of the Water Committee, Oscar Oliveira, who organized the demonstration, was seen as a local Che Guevara.
The water war in Cochabamba, Bolivia, was a fight for democracy, a fight of the people wanting to be heard so that the people make the decisions and not the government, not the international financial organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, which make the decisions for us. Ultimately, the water war was a fight over who decides, whether it is us the people or the international organizations.
As the situation got out of control, the army began to take increasingly desperate and undemocratic measures. When the actions of this army sniper wearing civilian clothes were caught on camera, international condemnation followed. The government backed down. Today, nobody has a solution to one of the most basic problems in Bolivia: how to bring affordable water to the town of Cochabamba. This is the Chapare region of Bolivia. In recent years, it's been famous for growing coca, which is then refined into cocaine and exported. There are army checkpoints on all roads into the area, and every vehicle entering or leaving is searched. Bolivians have always produced coca, which they drink as a tea or chew. But once cheap refined cocaine became available in the United States, demand for the drugs spiraled out of control, and peasants began growing increasing amounts of coca. Bolivia has been under intense pressure from the US to control its production. This government has made coca eradication and alternative development part of the comprehensive development framework. For the Vice President, there are 3 reasons for the eradication program.
The first is this was the most aggravating stereotype that Bolivia faced. It damages the country. Number 2 is that the money that people derive from this is so corrosive that it could contaminate anything that it touches in Bolivia, be it political parties, banks, business people, media, you name it, military, police, anything that it would touch, it would contaminate. Because for a small country like this, amounts of money were extremely corrosive. And number 3, consumption in Bolivia quadrupled.
Local farmers in this area of the Chapare have been coerced into ripping up their coca plants and growing alternative crops.
My name is Alejandro Terrazas. Here I am in a citrus grove. Well, on this side I have some oranges and mandarins. Over there I have some macadamia plants. In the middle of the citrus plants.
Alejandro planted macadamia nut trees on the advice of European experts who told him they'd be profitable. To carry this out, he borrowed money, over $6,000.
They told us a kilo of macadamia nuts would sell for $25, and each tree would produce 100 to 150 kilo every year. So that's why I decided to plant a hectare of macadamia nuts. Almost 70% of the trees have died, and the other 30% have survived don't produce those kinds of results. I calculate that at most is about 2 kilos per tree.
It's been a disaster. Most of the macadamia trees are rotted away because of high humidity levels. As a result, Alejandro is now behind on payments of the original loan. To compound the problem, the market price for his oranges and lemons is in decline because of overproduction. For Alejandro, it's been a sorry business.
The alternative development program hasn't worked. So much money was put into the program, and it pains me to have to say this, but it has to be said clearly, that the alternative development program, sadly, is for those that work in institutions, not for those who work on the land.
The comprehensive development framework has now been in place for just over a year, during which the income of the average Bolivian has fallen slightly. For the World Bank, it's just the beginning of a long process.
We are just now learning. The donors, most donors here, they are really aligned. There's been a lot of work happening at the level of ministries of economic development, at the grassroots. There's a lot of work there. But then you have to bring in civil society. I think the dialogue is a good step in that direction. But how do you make it go beyond a minimal small group to really make a difference in a sustainable way? That you have a change in government and it doesn't disappear. I think that's the challenge.
The people of Bolivia are waiting for that challenge to be met.
Acara ini disponsori oleh